Good morning. We'd like to get started. I apologize, this is not for the sound system. We have the microphone for Periscope and for those on WTRE who will be joining us live for this event. So we do appreciate their coverage and to get the information out here about our community vision. It's an exciting day really for the community. We've spent almost 6 months bringing together a lot of different data. Information on the progress will be shared today, but it's been a fun thing to be a part of, because I have heard so many comments and so many pieces of input, and just the surveys alone were wondrous to read through. Lots of other comments, hundreds of comments literally from those surveys. So it's been great information, and really today is all about unveiling what the community would like to see for the city of Greensburg in the next 5 to 10 years. What they hope to accomplish, some projects that are really important to them, the things that they feel passionate about. That's really what this morning is all about. So join with me as we kind of walk through this process. At the end of my presentation, we'll have the opportunity for people to kind of walk around, make some input also on these flip charts, because we're not totally done with this vision. We wanted one more shot. We wanted you to kind of see what it's looking like, the kinds of things that people are saying, and then if you wanted opportunities to add some feedback to that so that we can get that into the final version of the plan, we'll be able to do that before the end of the month. The goal is actually to have the entire plan completed by the end of December. So I appreciate you coming out on a snowy day, but it's information worth coming out for, I can tell you. So as we worked through this, we had a task force of about 22 people. Originally, this all started conversations probably started February, March timeframe. Mark Copland, Natasha Kellerman, and myself attended a Stellar Communities workshop in Indianapolis in February, heard what some of the Stellar requirements are. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Stellar, it's a program started by the state, and it runs under the Office of Community and Rural Affairs. Each year they name a community, a stellar community, one over 6,000 in population and one under 6,000 in population. And as we were told time and time again throughout that process is, it's not about the money, because significant amounts of money can come with being named a stellar community. It's about the process. We realized that it's a process that the city of Greensburg really hasn't been through in allowing the community residents to kind of vision about the future, dream about the kinds of projects they'd like to see, and then have that guide us in that direction. So communities that are applying for Stellar usually go through this type of a process or something through another program that brings the community residents around projects that are identified and can be funded as part of the Stellar effort if you are named a Stellar community. Typically 7 to 10 projects are chosen out of that, and I've seen some of the applications that have ranged anywhere from $20 to $30 million in projects that may be put out on the table. Obviously, if you're named a Stellar community, you get fast-tracked on the grant process that comes as a result. So there's 11 state agencies who partner with the Stellar program. And when you apply to those agencies for funding after having been named a Stellar community, then you are fast-tracked. You're basically put to the top of the list, and you're pretty assured that you're going to get the funding. You just have to jump through all of those hoops that it takes to get that funding. So that Stellar community is kind of what started all of this, and the Stellar program started in 2010, actually. So as this task force met and started talking about a community vision and what that might look like, they needed to actually identify a vision. So they determined that the vision for the community should be cultivating progress rooted in community aspirations for a brighter future. And that's really what this process is about. We want to cultivate some progress, make some things happen as a result of what the residents have told us, what they want their brighter future to look like. And so all of the projects that we'll talk about today really help do that and are really important to the residents of the community. These were the 5 original partners that started this process. And I'd like to recognize Tammy Winning is here, the executive director of the Community Foundation. The Decatur County Community Foundation was one that came to the table. Mark Copland, who's the executive director of the Economic Development Corp., they came to the table. Jeff Imsweller, Chamber of Commerce. Wendy Blake, Main Street Greensburg. And I don't think Gary is here, or I haven't seen him come in. So These are the 5 partners that originally said, hey, we need to put together this community vision. We need to determine what people would like to see happen, but we need somebody to kind of help drive it and help get the information together for us. So that's when they came to me and I made a proposal. We actually got started in June on the process. During that process, we determined this is really what we wanted to happen out of it. We wanted to align the goals, objectives, and the benchmarks of the community and do some planning. We also wanted to kind of adopt some shared values among the community, find some transforming ideas, and I think we have a couple of those things that can really make big changes in our community and change really the outlook of the community, the pride that people have in the community, those types of things. We have those kinds of projects, I think, within this list. We wanted to engage citizens in the process, obviously, which we did, and as I said earlier, facilitate change, and then to develop some attractions for new residents. We wanted to stay competitive with other communities. Quite frankly, if you're not these days, you're falling behind. You know, there's some communities who are very aggressively looking to the future, looking to make changes and do some positive things. Thank you, Jeff. And those communities are really moving ahead and attracting new residents. You know, that's an interesting thought because I have had expressed to me about why I like Greensburg the way it is. I don't want it to become a Columbus. I don't want to be a Indianapolis. Well, quite frankly, when I show you a map, if we experienced a rate of growth of about 2%, which is fairly high for a lot of the communities or the counties in the state, it would take us about 10 to 15 years till we got to the size of Shelbyville. So, you know, it's a long-term prospect. We're not talking about overnight explosive growth that's going to change this community immediately. And I don't think anybody wants that. It needs to be a controlled type of situation, but we do want to grow. So to prepare for a potential stellar application was the other thing that we were looking at. Here's the map of the state, and we've used this at a lot of our meetings, but for those of you who haven't seen it, it is population change by township in the state of Indiana. And I apologize for standing in front of you, but I can go this direction, I suppose. Since I don't have, okay, since I'm not using it, I'll just sit it here in the center. If you look at this map, some things stand out, and it's the fact that the growth in the state is concentrated in the metropolitan areas. There are 54 of 92 counties in the state that have had a decline in population, and those are all rural counties. So this is what really drove Okra to start the Stellar program. How do we make rural communities more attractive to potential new residents? You see, the real growth is focused around metropolitan areas, around Evansville, Louisville, Indianapolis, South Bend, and you see some smaller types of growth happening like around the Fort Wayne area. College campuses are a huge attraction. You see around Purdue a significant amount of growth, and then also around IU you see some growth. But those counties that are outliers, we are really only one of 2 that have experienced any type of growth, and it's a very small amount over the last few years. So our location does help us, and we heard that that's one big advantage that people think we have over a lot of other communities. Some other things obviously play into that. So that's, again, where the Stellar Community Initiative came into. In order to apply for Stellar, while this wasn't all about Stellar, it was really more about, this is a valuable process to go through whether or not we end up applying for Stellar. They want to see projects that would be identified and selected in a final application that increase the assessed valuation of the community. That obviously is important for everyone. As the valuation increases, the more tax revenue that comes in, the more we can provide public services and do those types of things. So increasing assessed value should be important to every community. Growing in population, they want projects that will help advance that. Those that will increase educational attainment. As we found out, we only have approximately 16% of our population has a bachelor's degree or higher in Decatur County, and compared to some other counties, that's very low. And so, not that everyone needs a degree, there's obviously steps between that, certificate types of programs, technical programs. We heard a lot about, You know, anyone who needs professional services, whether it's HVAC or whatever it may be, plumbing, it's difficult to get some of those, and a lot of our key players in the community will be retiring in the next 10 years. Who's going to be there to take their place? And quite frankly, that's a national trend, and people in the trades can do very well financially, but it's convincing people that's a good place to go. And so having a means of doing that was important. Increasing public school enrollment is another thing they would like to see, and then to see our per capita income increase. The per capita income in the city of Greensburg is right around $21,000 to $22,000. Again, that's much lower than in surrounding communities and in communities around the state. So we need to figure out how we can do some things to advance that. Our process in capturing all this data and talking about what the future might look like, we needed to have good feedback. And so when we finish all of this, and I talk about this, at the end of the day, whenever we got to the end, we had, I think it was approximately 2,800 pieces of input from the community. In order for us to feel really confident, what they call the confidence interval when you're looking at statistics, on these surveys, we could have asked every resident of Greensburg the exact same question, and the percentages that we saw in the end wouldn't have varied by more than probably 2% either way, based on the number of responses we had. So we felt very good about the fact we were getting a good cross-section of the community's input. So we did have 2,523 survey responses. I think we may have actually had a couple more after that. We had 45 neighborhood networking attendees. We had small sessions around the community asking people, this is your time to give some public input, show up at these meetings. They mirrored the polling places, and we attempted to get the word out as best we could about those meetings through social media, traditional media, and so forth. Some really good input came from those, and people who were very passionate about the community and wanted to see some things happen. So we were pleased with that input. We had 30-plus generational meeting attendees. We had generational meetings that people agreed to host in their homes. We asked baby boomers, traditionalists. We had Generation X and Y, or millennials. And it was interesting to see the differences in their opinions on what needed to happen, what the community was about. And it also gave us a glimpse of what the future could look like. And if we're attempting to attract residents of that age group and young families, then we need to be concerned about what their thoughts are and how we can best incorporate those. Because it really is, this whole process is about the future and what this community becomes. Did 30 one-on-one interviews, had 50 individual group presentations. We ended up with 690 likes on our Facebook page, which there was some good comment that happened on there. One of the highest, I guess the one that people felt most passionate about was retail options in the community and restaurants. Generated a lot of conversation, over 100 comments relative to what people would like to see happen there. We had 6 radio and newspaper appeals, and then we had a Dreams and Visions committee, and I'd like to recognize Diane Hart-Dawson because she actually chaired that for us, that gathered a group of dreamers, as we would like to call them, or people with vision, to say, what if? You know, what kinds of things are out there that we might not be thinking about? And they gave us some feedback that we didn't necessarily have on the radar at the time, but it did become more so as we moved along in the process. So that was great to have them looking at that for us. And then, you know, there's a lot of talk about, we've done so much planning, and there's a lot of, you know, we do comprehensive plans. The Y does a strategic plan, Main Street does a plan, the hospital does a plan. Lots of plans out there, but they're really not aligned in any way to an overall guiding star type of plan, if you would. And that's what this really needs to become if it's going to become effective. Every organization, whether it's governmental, nonprofit, or business in the community, gets aligned with goals for the future. That's when it becomes really powerful, because they're all headed in the same direction. You make much better use of resources that are available. You also get more volunteers involved. You get a lot of passion around projects, and things start to happen. It generates a lot of enthusiasm in the community around that when everyone knows where we're going. It's not unlike your business. or an individual organization. You need your team to understand where you're headed, what's going to happen, for them to get on board and to support it. So it's much like that. We looked at all of those different plans that had been done recently enough that the data could still be trusted, because once you pass 2 or 3 years, things change, obviously. And so, we did look at the comprehensive plan and lots of others. The Parks and Rec has a master plan that's just being redone. We looked at those kinds of things to be sure we're incorporating those in this vision. Then we had mygreensburg.org and greensburgprogress@gmail.com. They're both still up, so if you'd like to make additional input, that's a place you can go to do so. We did receive significant input through those channels, so it was good to hear that as well. The final plan will end up looking something like this. It'll be a community vision that's been put together. We'll have the traditional things that you could think you'd see in a plan like that. It's going to have the who the original partners were, the task force involved, an executive summary. Our methodology and approach will be addressed in there, demographics. Then what you'll find is, out of this whole process, the community identified 6 primary focus areas that they feel we need to be dealing with, things that really needed to be addressed. We've got a lot of different initiatives, but they all kind of funneled under these 6 areas. Then there's actually 14 citizen recommendations, which I'll be going over here in a minute. And those also resulted in about 40 project initiatives that the community would like to see us undertake. Some of those are larger than others, but there's some great ideas. So here's the areas that the people really felt we needed to focus on. The first was quality of life, dealing with amenities, recreation, arts, and entertainment. People feel very strongly that we need a stronger quality of life that is attractive to new residents. We know that there are instances where we're trying to attract professionals or whoever it may be, and you take a tour of the community, and while you try to sell the concept that we're only an hour away from a lot of the things they're looking for, sometimes it's not them as much as it may be their spouse that's concerned about, what am I going to do? Where are the kids going to be entertained? What can we do in the evenings? Where do you shop? Where do you do these? Those kinds of things tend to limit the interest of individuals in the city of Greensburg. That's the general opinion. It's not a negative, because it's typical of a lot of rural areas, but that was one of the biggest that came to the table. Economic advancement, which is, of course, retail, commercial, industrial, and the tourism side of things. They're all things that can really drive a lot of revenue into this community and can help it in a lot of ways. Why do you think Indianapolis is attracting all types of conventions? It's because they're filling hotel rooms, they're filling restaurants. They know they're stopping to get gas. There's a lot of benefits from having people come into the community and spend dollars and help out. Physical infrastructure was addressed. Our utilities, our transportation means, the housing that we have available. It was mentioned that maybe we don't have all of the types of housing that are attractive to younger people, and maybe that's why we have trouble attracting some. That is obviously one component of that. So we'll look at that as well. Community integrity. If you think of the integrity of a building, it's kind of the underlying structure, everything that kind of holds it together, makes it strong. In our community, that's education, volunteerism, and leadership, philanthropy, and social services, which play a major role in all of this, in helping make a stronger community for us. So we found that there are a lot of issues surrounding that. Effective communications. This may have been one that kind of surprised us a little bit. At one of our meetings, I put up a list of what I called stop statements. They were things that people said that made me stop and think, yeah, that's true. Or we need to look at that a little bit more. But media channels, networks, image, and branding are all under the effective communications piece. It seems, at least in my assessment, is from a media perspective, we've relied more on traditional forms of media, and the community hasn't really followed the trends, social media-wise, in getting public information out about the community, if that makes any sense. Individuals are doing so, organizations are doing so, but there's no centralized means of getting that information out and connecting with those people who are only using that to get their information. So planning and aspirations was the other thought here, the other area, and it's really all about the vision and the dreams and the planning and enabling that to surface and for positive things to come from that. Excuse me. So the first area of quality of life was citizens' recommendations. Their first recommendation was the addition of a performance venue and entertainment. There seems to be a real lack of available entertainment in the community. People like the idea of a small theater of some kind, and an outdoor amphitheater was mentioned often, something that people would like to see. This small staged theater concept was brought about because there's trouble in scheduling the public school facilities sometimes, and sometimes the thought was they can be a little cavernous for smaller types of performances, or people are talking about speakers, authors. If anybody has been to some of the programming that the library has done, sometimes their room is packed because there's not enough space there for people to fit in, depending on the program. Small musical acts, lots of different types of entertainment. And if it were staged there on a regular basis, that seemed to be the key that we heard a lot. People don't know what's going on when sometimes. I'm trying to think of Warsaw and Wabash are two communities in the northern part of the state that are similar size to Greensburg that very successfully have incorporated this kind of an idea. And Warsaw has the Wagon Wheel Theater that draws a number of people in throughout the year. Wabash, of course, benefited from the Honeywell Center, which was a huge gift from the Honeywell Foundation that helped to build that facility near their downtown. It's a larger facility, and it attracts Broadway types of performances and so forth, mostly for single night performances, but it does generate a lot of revenue, a lot of activity. So there was discussion about where that actually would be located, and there was talk about possibly housing something like that near downtown where people could benefit from the existing restaurants, and driving activity there is obviously important because people supportive of the arts tend to spend more money before and after their performances. So that was viewed as a key initiative, and quite frankly, it received a lot of support. And I will give you at the end of this the matrix that shows the survey responses and some of the things, so you'll be able to see how strongly these came in. The creation of the amphitheater was the next thing that a lot of people mentioned, and I think people have been familiar with the Rushville situation. And for those who may not know, Rushville was designated as a stellar community over 6,000 in population for 2016. So they are going to actually be making some improvements to their amphitheater. They're doing some projects downtown as well. And so things will be happening with that. But a lot of talk here as to where that would be located. A couple of pieces were mentioned. One was Rebecca Park. The other was at the fairgrounds. There's a natural space possibly there. And then later in the process, as Purdue is working with the group on enhancing public spaces, and the old County Reservoir property was mentioned as a possible site for something like that too, because it's a little further away from housing and so forth. So the two most popular were Rebecca Park and the fairgrounds were the two things that were mentioned most. Improving recreational facilities, increasing options in family activities. That was kind of the second big recommendation that came about. People wanted to see family fun zones established, places where they could take their kids and enjoy a Sunday afternoon, or the family together could enjoy something. Lots of different types of ideas, and this will be detailed more in the final plan, but they may be indoor park types of facilities, something that could be used year-round. There's mention of splash pads, and those types of things were mentioned a lot. So those things are really important. And again, if we're going to look to attract younger residents, it's even more important because you need those things that are going to attract young families. Staging purposeful events and festivals. People like the idea of getting together Also, the outside benefit of drawing people into the community for the right festivals and events. For people to come together and enjoy those types of activity as a community, and they feel it's very important to have those. Obviously, it takes people to do that, and it takes volunteers to stage those types of events. But I think what we were hearing was, for the right events, people will be there, people would like to get involved, and especially some new and energizing types of things that might happen, they were very enthused about doing those. There was lots of mention about food and flavor types of events. The Tenderloin Throwdown would be along those lines. Wine and craft brewery types of events that some communities host. There was a lot of different unique things that were thrown out that could be a lot of fun for the community. Enhancing and connecting downtown and the fairgrounds. This came up time and time again, and it was something that our Dreams and Visions Committee kind of threw out there. And then also, we heard it a lot under transportation when we're talking about good pedestrian access to the fairgrounds and doing some type of multi-use path that might connect downtown with the fairgrounds. So it was rather interesting because we did a little study driving from the foundation office actually to the tennis courts via Park Road was 2.2 miles, and driving via Main Street was 2.1 miles. So it was kind of like, it's actually a little closer to go this direction. So maybe somehow something could be tied in with the Main Street redevelopment. If you saw a multi-use path and Main Street was improved and infill started to pop up along Main Street and some fun kinds of things happened there, it could be pretty powerful, and it would show some real progress, and it would improve the gateway into the community. So that was discussed a lot. Developing a dog park was big. Heard it over and over again. Lots of other responses on our survey surrounding some type of a dog park that residents could utilize. And again, it's an amenity that a lot of people see in other communities, and they like the idea, or they've lived in other communities where they had them, and they would like to see the same thing here. So that was pretty strong. General park and facility upgrades. Again, people want to enjoy those amenities. We obviously are very fortunate to have what we have, but there needs to be a commitment to expand that. And that means additional funding, probably additional staff, additional things that can make those things happen. That's where it's at. Under economic advancement, the citizens' recommendation was to pursue projects that generate additional visitor revenues. And they saw that as very important, a very important piece. Development of a large event center was really huge in all sectors. People feel there's a need for a large event center. And quite frankly, probably the largest facility we would have, I guess, in town is the Knights of Columbus Hall, which probably 300 at the max. And if you have tables and that type of thing, that's probably pushing that. So something more the 500 to 1,000 category is what people were talking, so that people don't have to take weddings out of town. They don't have to take other events out of town to find space to house these. It could be a large driver regionally. People saw that there's a lot of organizations sponsoring conferences and workshops around the state. Many times they're looking for new locations to go, whether it's a CPA society or the Treasury Management organization, whatever it may be. I know they all have their conferences and are frequently looking for new places to host them. You get all those people come in, for a couple of nights, they spend some money, hotels and restaurants. It's a win-win situation. So this event center, really, it was probably, I would say it was in the top 5 of things that we heard people wanted to happen. Expanding the sports complex usage. There's a lot of conversation around this, and the fact that people are seeing that other communities are developing their sports complexes or are building new sports complexes in order to benefit from these visitor revenues. So frequently people said, I hear all the time people love coming to Greensburg to play at this particular sports complex because of all the other amenities that surround it. You've got the park, you've got the miniature golf course, you've got bowling, you've got lots of things that people can do in between the games that are taking place. And up until now, I guess, Bob, you can correct me, but all of the tournaments that have been held have been ran by volunteers, correct? The people that coordinate the tournaments are volunteers. Okay. Okay. So, you know, when you look at Westfield and someone else just announced, was it Westfield that just announced? Hamilton, there'll be two actually up in that area. But it was just announced in the last few weeks that they're building a new complex. And then I had someone at one of our meetings that brought up an interesting idea. They said, you know, I was in Jasper one day, where Jasper's similar size to Greensburg, and there was all these people in the restaurants, and the hotel was booked, and I'm like, what's going on? And they were having a basketball tournament in Jasper that utilized every available field house in the community, which included their county schools, so they had drives to get to the other facilities. And they had 3,000 to 4,000 people participating in this basketball tournament. So you can imagine the impact that something like that could have on a community. Yeah, it's a short term, it's a one weekend possibly, but again, so you're talking expanding sports complex usage, but also looking at year-round types of activities that could draw people in that vein. Youth sports are huge. There's a lot of dollars being spent there, and a lot of communities are capitalizing on that, so why shouldn't we be one of them that benefits from some of that too? That was kind of the thought. Increasing retail and commercial options. As I said, lots of passion around this and what people would like to see and what they want to happen. The attraction of some type of a large grocery and a department store were the two things that we heard over and over and over. Early on in the stages, it became, we want a Kroger, we want a Kroger. Well, they have been approached. They don't seem to be interested. They're only building 100,000 square foot stores right now or more, and they need to generate a certain amount of revenue in the community per week in order to justify that, and they don't feel that it would come here. The other thing is you have to look, and there are some large Krogers in surrounding communities that our residents are patronizing, and so when they look at their statistics, they track the shoppers. They know that if they built a store here, it's going to cannibalize some business from those stores. So, you know, the thought was that's probably not too likely. We're not saying it would never happen, but as conversations progressed, maybe it just needs to be a large grocery of some kind that would bring what people are looking for, especially in the way of produce. Lots of comments about we need good produce available in town, and obviously we have a farmer's market during the summer, but whenever growing season is passed, sometimes that's limited. So we need another option. Developing new restaurants. We got to where we asked them, what kinds of restaurants do you want in the community? Italian, steakhouse were the two top things mentioned. So people would like to see that. Generating employment opportunities that increase per capita income. That was another thing that people want to see happen. They were pretty specific about they would like to see jobs attracted that were either of a different type, that were not manufacturing jobs, or at least that were higher paying. And they felt that we have an advantage because of our location, and we have some things that are natural matches for that. Things like logistics and warehousing and some other types of things. But general pursuit of higher wage positions and the attraction of a corporate headquarters, which sometimes it's like, oh yeah, how many corporations are looking? There are opportunities, and there are things that come about. Shelbyville just attracted a corporate headquarters of an agricultural firm called Crone, and they're going to bring about 100 jobs that are include their training center will be located there. Some positive things will be happening there. So that was a smaller type of deal. That would be a perfect fit. Those kinds of things would be perfect fits for our community. And to diversify the employment base. There's more comment on that we are heavily auto-related today, and people would like to see us move away from that. There was a time when we were less so, and we had a number of different industries in different fields. It's obviously good when you have an economic downturn. Some industries suffer more than others, so you want to be able to protect yourself against that. People recognize that and would like to head that direction. Under physical infrastructure, there was a lot of talk about improving gateways, connecting, and developing multi-use paths. Linking of the existing trails. Conversations happened about the fact that they love the trail. It gets a lot of usage. The specific one that we have right now, well, we actually have two. One along Veterans Way is multi-use, and then from Rebecca Park to the County School Administration Building. It gets a lot of use, but people will say, I love walking there, but I have to walk to it, or I would like to be able to walk to that trail, and it's not linked in any way. So we need to consider what ways can that happen, what kinds of grants might there be. I know there were some efforts made in that direction, and we actually have a group that works on multi-use paths and trails, and they're looking at lots of different things. So in some of these instances, efforts are being made. People just weren't aware that they were being made. And sometimes we found our meetings being educational types of opportunities. The possibility of rehabbing North Michigan was pretty strong. People liked the idea of, from the fire station to the bypass, seeing an improved street, much like Lincoln Street from First on to the bypass looks. They like this idea, and it would also be able then to connect the YMCA to downtown. That was mentioned when we talked about paths, very popular idea. If we had a sidewalk that went all the way to the Y, that would be great because people could get some exercise on their way to getting exercise or taking advantage of some of the other programs they're offer. So that was really important. The whole concept of improving gateways was talked about a lot. And I mentioned at one of our meetings, if you go to Indianapolis today and you drive on the main roads and you're going to say, oh, their roads are great, they're all clear. They focus on the main roads and the arteries, and if you go a little off, they're not so much so, right? Communities do that a lot in trying to improve the first impressions of their community. Focus on the gateways and the arteries. As people drive through, it really leaves a great first impression. And they may say, that's kind of interesting. I'd like to consider maybe moving there, or there are some things I'd like to check out there. So improving gateways and arteries are really important. Again, connecting the downtown to the fairgrounds. Southeast side pedestrian access. Talk about along 421 from Main Street out to now the new St. Mary's campus, because there are more people walking, and I travel that way quite frequently, and I see people in the ditch walking in the grass along 421, or sometimes very close to the road, which isn't a safe situation. So we could possibly work on that and figure out how could that happen. And sometimes it might not be directly along that highway. Maybe there's another route that can access that somehow that's not along the highway. So those kinds of things need to be considered and should be looked at. General sidewalk improvement and replacement. Lots of conversations about sidewalks, and I know the mayor has some things in the works right now relative to sidewalks, and there's just general improvement that needs to happen. It's an aging infrastructure. Lots of communities have dealt with that. If you've walked any on the sidewalks, you've got some areas the tree roots have pushed up one section and can be a little dangerous or whatever, and it needs to be consistent throughout the community that it's walkable and we can get around easily. It was affectionately termed the sign garden in one of our surveys down at Main and Lincoln, and that maybe that area could use a little improvement, or somehow it's a great place to receive information. It actually is a communication vehicle, but it needs to be either managed or more uniform in its presentation. So some communities have developed a system where maybe there are 4x8 panels, and organizations schedule those in advance, and then they bring their panel and they just put it in there. They all look the same. So it helps promote the nonprofit efforts, but it just helps clean it up a little, and you don't have ones that have fallen over for a couple weeks, or events that have passed for a period of time, or a for-profit venture that tries to put something in there kind of thing. So it's a good place to make some improvements. Adding housing and maintaining the existing stock. Additional housing stock, particularly in the 250 and under range, was mentioned that there's a great need for. And it was my understanding at the time we were writing this, and I think it's probably still the case, that all of our apartment complexes in Greensburg have waiting lists. I don't know that, like I said, that's so as of today, but it was a few weeks ago. So it kind of tells you where we are relative to housing stock and what's available for people. Condominium development was mentioned, and that was rather interesting because we found that there were younger people who either don't want all of the maintenance of a home, and they're like, I'd rather just spend my money having fun, but I'd like to own it, you know? So I want a homeowners association that takes care of the roof and the yard and all those kinds of things. There are no condos in Greensburg for anyone under the age of 55. And I had a friend who was wanting to relocate here that was in her 40s, and that's exactly what she wanted, and there was no option for her. We also heard that people want to start building equity in their homes. You know, you can rent an apartment or rent a house for so long, but a condo sometimes is a good step in between an apartment and a full house. So you can buy that, you own it, and you can get your money back whenever you sell it. Increased rental options, again, because of the fact that most of our apartment complexes are full. So people want to see increased rental options. And encourage and enforce housing maintenance. There's already some ordinances on the books and trying to keep neighborhoods looking better. Obviously, there's some instances where economically that's difficult for people to do. And so we talked a lot about a national program that exists that's called Paint the Town. And it enables neighborhoods to be targeted and to be assisted by volunteers on a quick hit 1 week project where people come and help paint homes for people who can't afford to do that. And people said that's something that they would like to see happen, and they think it would be successful and people would be willing to be engaged with. So we need to look at those things more. Relative to community integrity, developing emerging leadership and volunteers and collaborative partnerships was really important. Focusing on leadership evolution and development, there's some concern that a lot of our community leadership is of the age that they will be either not volunteering anymore or in the future won't be able to volunteer, those types of things. I'm probably one of them. So who's going to take the place of these individuals? We don't really see younger emerging leadership. Younger people say that's because the avenues aren't there for them to get involved. People aren't providing a channel for them to move into those types of positions. So we need to figure out what that looks like and how people can be helped along that path. And I think, Jeff, you've got a leadership. Yep. That's going to be coming soon, so that'll be an opportunity for people to take advantage of that particular program. Developing partnerships and collaborative efforts. There's a lot of talk about the fact that, you know, lots of people are doing good things, and there's a lot of discussions going on, but sometimes the right people aren't talking to one another, and that they're not accomplishing as much as a result. And if so-and-so worked with so-and-so, this could be a lot easier and it could be less expensive and it could be more successful. So they'd like to see more partnerships. And quite frankly, from a perspective of what I do working with nonprofits, I see it nationally. There's actually mergers of nonprofits happening, and funders are demanding that organizations become more efficient and combine efforts to get projects done, or we're not going to fund it anymore. So, you know, that's coming down the pike, and it's a good thing to think about. Pursuing increased volunteer engagement. Everybody says, I need more volunteers, we need volunteers. There's tons of volunteer opportunities out there. But on the other side, I kept hearing, nobody ever asks me. And nationally, the number one reason why people volunteer is because they were asked. And unfortunately, organizations aren't doing that a lot of the times. They don't know where to ask. They don't know the people who are interested in being involved. They don't know the passions of some of the people that want to be involved. So we need to figure out a way to be able to match those people. Some communities have done it as simply as a Facebook page, where organizations get onto this centralized Facebook page and said, we're doing this weekend and we need 4 volunteers to help with X. And suddenly, people pop up and volunteer. So it may be as simple as that. So there just needs to be a way to accomplish that. They'd like to see us aggressively address some social issues that exist. Decreasing of substance abuse. Again, it's a national problem. People see that even locally and in our community, it's a problem, and it's something that's impacting the ability of families to function. It's impacting children. It's having broad-reaching effects. It's impacting crime, accidents, lots of different things. And so somehow we need to get a grasp on substance abuse whether it's a community summit that comes together and lots of organizations who are attempting to do this decide, hey, let's figure out what the best route is for us to work together towards this problem. Increasing mentoring opportunities. While some mentoring programs exist, there could be many more that take place in this community and help meet some of the social issues that were addressed. There needs to be stronger mentoring programs. There's also some excellent models in some other communities that we could base upon. There were things nationally, the Positive Parenting Program was mentioned. The All Pro Dads program was mentioned. Some different programs that might be able to be utilized to help in this vein. To pursue the co-location of nonprofits is another major issue. It's been talked about for many years. There was even a task force that was looking at some ideas at one point, but it's never really progressed beyond that. Lots of thought about nonprofits could be much more effective, and they could be more efficient if they were sharing space. They could theoretically share things like copiers. They could share staff. They could have one receptionist for several different agencies. They could bring everybody together, and then in the end, the service recipient really benefits because they only have to go to one location to be able to visit one or two or three nonprofits that they need to. And some people receiving services have transportation issues, so it helps with that as well because they don't have to go all over town to do that. So bringing them all together in a central location was mentioned. Addressing educational attainment levels. We need to increase educational levels in the community, as I said, with the fact that the bachelor's degree is at 16.5% or whatever, and in other means as well, we need to increase that. Adding certificate and adult special interest courses was really popular. The adult special interest came in when I was talking to our baby boomers group. They said, you know, people think we want to retire and just sit around, and that's not us. We'd like to have some special interest courses that we could go to learn some different things, whether it's photography or, I know Hank Martin's into the bonsai trees. Learn how to do these kinds of things because there's a market out there for it, for people. And adding certificate types of courses. I know the high school has been really involved in vocational education and so forth, but there's also some opportunities that might come forth at the Learning Center that could benefit people who are wanting to advance their skills and maybe change careers and head in a different direction. It's also something we heard is that we could help those people more that sometimes the person who got out of high school wasn't able to go to college or didn't choose to at the time and then decides, I wish I had gotten a little bit more education in X. How do they get back into that? Learning Center helps, but again, I think getting word out about what's available and what the resources are and how you could provide assistance is sometimes where we lack. Under effective communications, that's a segue into that. There was lots of talk, especially early on when I met with the 5 organizations, and I said, when you put the 5 logos up there, all are some way responsible for promoting the city of Greensburg. None of them seem to be linked visually when they send something out to potential visitors or whatever. There's no commonality between all 5 organizations. So we talked about how they may accomplish that, and I know they've had some conversations about that themselves in looking at that, and developing some kind of a unified message that we're all putting out there as a community. Hey, come to Greensburg because it's whatever. That message, the narrative that needs to go with our promotion of the community isn't really there yet, but I know that there are processes underway to deal with that. The promotion of a welcoming community. That was one of my stop statements, was when somebody at one of our meetings said, everybody says we're so friendly, but I'm not sure we're that welcoming. I'm like, that's an interesting thought. I have to think about that a little bit. And then we got into the whole thing about, I've been here for 25 years and I'm still a move-in. And I don't know that I ever really felt accepted, da 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 da. You know, these kinds of conversations started happening. And when you think about it, we don't really have a means in place to really welcome new residents. And there used to be a newcomers organization where people, when they moved into the community, they kind of got together, they had some social interaction, and they could find out information about the community, and they felt they knew a few people that were there when they needed. Because if you're moving here, you have no family or whatever, how do you make those connections and the networks? So that's where we really thought the promotion of the welcoming community was important. So ways that were talked about in doing that was the development of possibly a community ambassador corps. A lot of people out there feel very passionate about this community and would like to help promote it. So what if we had this ambassador corps who was willing to go out and meet with individuals when they came to town? Maybe it's even groups. I went to the post office one day and there was a motor coach at the Historical Society. You know, I'm not sure what all they were doing in town that day, but I think they were having lunch. They had visited the Historical Museum. So there were probably individuals obviously helping them throughout that day. But sometimes you're downtown and you see people taking pictures of the courthouse, and they're kind of like looking around, where do I go to get some information? Who would I talk to? Somebody mentioned one community had people going around that actually had a T-shirt on that said, ask me a question, I'm a whatever they were called in that community. Not a bad idea. You know, yeah, maybe we don't have that many, but it would put forth a really nice image. So the newcomers group. And then signage. There's lots of talk about other communities have signs on the interstate that say Harrison, Ohio, if you've driven down there, has the thing over the overpass. Some do it alongside the thing in different ways. Why don't we have something like that? Well, obviously we can. It just needs to be an initiative that someone takes on and says, hey, welcome to Greensburg. Then we can also tie it in with some signage that once they get off the interstate, some wayfinding signage that gets them around to key points in town. And I know, again, various efforts have been talked about there, and there are some things that are being considered and underway. So it's an important piece to making people feel more comfortable while they're in our community. So implementing a new potential resident and visitor campaign is one of those two. New potential resident and visitor was being more aggressive about marketing that to individuals outside of our community. Again, something that's not really being done right now aggressively. Improving intra-community communication. Increasing the online communication options is what I talked about before. People recognize there's not a real good means of communicating with all of the other residents regarding community issues online. There are lots of individual websites. There's been efforts over the years to communicate community calendars, eliminate conflicts when people are scheduling events. Wouldn't it be nice if you could go to the community calendar and see, we're trying to schedule this in September, oh, there's already this happening, so maybe we want to go there. Nothing like that exists right now. The community Facebook presence, and somebody mentioned at one of the meetings that they would be willing to sign up for community text alerts about things that were going to be happening this weekend or whatever. So again, not a bad idea. There's a segment that would like to get information that way, so it's worth considering. There's enough people that would like to see that. Under planning and aspirations, really it was mentioned that we should invest in 4 key areas. People saw the downtown area as one of those that would require some significant investment. Lots of talk about finishing the other 3 sides of the square, and that the west side looks really nice when we do the other 3 sides. It's been a financial issue, obviously, and some other things, but it's a key component to making our community more attractive, more interesting to potential visitors. Rebecca Park is another one that was mentioned as sort of underutilized. It's being more so. More people are using it. Now that the trail comes into the park, there's also other opportunities for things that have been discussed, like people mentioned Frisbee golf. What if there was a Frisbee golf course in the community, and that might attract some people? So it could be there, or it could be at the fairgrounds. The fairgrounds is another place that lots of buildings that sit for most of the year. Obviously, this time of year, they're storing RVs and boats and different things like that in some of the buildings. But what if some improvements were made there to make some of those facilities able to be used year-round? That's something that people would like to see happen. Veterans Way, lots of conversations about what does that end up looking like. And for anyone who hasn't seen, Mark has on their site, edcgdc.com, there is a site plan there put together by Structure Point, is that right? That identifies what the area should look like with big box retailers, restaurants, some housing mix, I think, at one end of it as well. So that's another significant area for potential investment. Up until development of Veterans Way, this community had no sites that were really visible from the interstate for retail and commercial types of interests, other than the one behind Walmart. So there is a need to develop the area. Most restaurants are wanting to take advantage of the 23,000 cars per day that go on 74 and be able to benefit from that traffic. So that's a prime place for them to go. The improvement of community aesthetics. The ordinances and codes and enforcement of those that we mentioned before is very important. The improvement of the gateways, welcoming progress in general. We need to be sure that people are all on board with that, was the thought. And promoting ourselves as kind of quaint, convenient, and caring were the three words that really came out of the whole exercise that kind of described what people thought we were about. So when we see the final plan, it'll look like this. It'll have these things detailed. Those are kind of like the highlights. It'll have each area. And you'll also see in the back, this is what I have a copy of, although I don't know if I have enough. But we'll get them to the people who are here who are not represented on the task force, and they already have some of this. But it'll show you what the responses were here, the numbers of responses, what percentage of that particular survey, the rank of those in that survey, and then which primary focus areas they really impact. Because obviously, some of these impact more than one area. So it's going to give you all of that information. At our last meeting, we talked to the task force about kind of identifying one or two quick hits out of all of this. And what are one or two early opportunities for improvement and what the approach may be. Who's going to be involved with that? How will it actually happen? Because the one thing that always happens with strategic planning in organizations, and I shouldn't say always because there's some that do a much better job, but I'd say 75% of the time, organizations tend to develop these types of plans and, oh, it's great, everybody told us what we needed, now what happens? Well, we don't want that to happen. And we want to develop out of this some type of a community advancement map that kind of identifies each of these, who's going to be responsible for it, and by when. And recognize some of these are like 5 to 10 year types of projects, things that people want to see happen. Others can be accomplished very quickly. So they have identified what they felt were the quick hit projects, the ones that can be approached, and then also what might be a potential stellar project, because we are still talking about the possibility of completing a stellar application in 2017. A letter of intent is due at the end of March. This information is great for that process and would help us immensely in that process. So determinations are still being made relative to that. But they have identified which ones they think have the most potential to be stellar projects. So, what's next? We need to complete the input that we've gathered so far. Today is part of that process. And then we need to finalize the plan. And then we'll get into, in some instances, some task force formation. There may be certain things that we need other input. We need volunteers. We need people to help out with. So we'd like to know if you're interested in helping in some way. Please let us know if you'd be willing to serve on some type of a committee for a specific project, because that's what it takes, is everybody getting behind it and doing it. And then we need organizations and governmental units to kind of approve this as, yes, this is where we want to go as well, and we want to pick up this piece of this and this piece of this and go there. And then, as I said, mygreensburg.org and greensburgprogress@gmail.com are the places to still go. After today, you get home and you think, oh gosh, I'm thinking this. Send it there, because we're still reviewing those. The last piece of today is I've put each of the recommendations on these charts. If you have any thoughts or comments or ways that you think it could be improved or changed within the plan, please note it on there. Just write it on there. I think it would be good if we did X in addition to this, or change this to include whatever. This is your chance to have some additional input into it. So please capture those today. And like I said, if you don't want to do it in that way, feel free to either send it or make the input via internet or email. So that's actually my final slide. We have a couple minutes for some questions. If anybody has any of those, I'd be happy to answer those, or I'm obviously going to be around and you can ask me individually. The answer to that is no. But I will be here at 7 o'clock this evening. So, any other questions? Serious questions?
You might have said at the beginning, David, is this slides that you did today, are they going to be accessible somewhere on a website?
We could put them, yes. Yes.
And the Periscope, it's live right now, but can you go back and review the Periscope?
Yes.
The best thing to do, what I would recommend, is when I get back, I'm going to upload it on YouTube. So you can go to the WTRE radio channel on YouTube, and it'll be there forever. I'll get that done sometime this afternoon.
And then we'll also link that and on our Facebook page, the Partners for Community Progress page. Good question. Any others? Yes, Greg.
What's going to be necessary to keep the momentum going to create that critical mass to get things moving in a direction? What small victories do we need? What's the plan?
Well, and that's quite frankly why at our task force we talked about the need to have a few quick hit types of projects so that we can see some progress and keep that momentum going. And so the task force will be reviewing that in January, probably around the middle of January, and kind of looking, okay, now we've got this, here's the plan, how do we get this to move forward and move it along on lots of these projects?
And if we're not selected for the Stellar Community Program, are there still steps in place where we can go forward with what we've identified? I mean, that would definitely make it easier, but it doesn't hinge on that.
Right, absolutely. Yes, there's a commitment before we even started this process that there's value in the process in identifying these projects, and yes, they need to progress. Maybe they won't be in the full scale, maybe it'll somehow be delayed a bit or whatever, but things need to progress towards these end goals, whether or not we do the stellar piece. So.
David, I think it's safe to say from the nonprofit standpoint, we don't want these plans to sit on the shelf. Whether we get stellar or not, these are things that's going to enhance our communities in future growth. And we just can't do something that we look at in 7 years and say, oh, how we're going to plan it now. We have to move forward. I think it's business from all.
Yeah, and I get the feeling, and I didn't say up front, but I have talked a lot with the mayor. I've talked with all the city council members. I had interviews with them, all of the city department heads, these nonprofits. I get the feeling that the stars are kind of aligned and that people are ready to make this happen and to see change and to cultivate the progress we talked about. So I think it's exciting because there's a lot of opportunity. Mark.
David, you had mentioned in describing the stellar process, and this goes to address your question that you just asked. That's the culmination of that puts you in a fast track for certain types of grants with the state. It may come through the federal government, have the same requirement. Doesn't mean you can't apply for that. That's why the process is important. We say, this project is really important to Greensburg, whatever, let's say the event center. There's so many people that have talked to us about that. Doesn't mean we can't go to tourism at the state and say, can we apply for this grant? Even if we're not a stellar community. Now, being a stellar community is great marketing for the Greensburg community. But if we don't win this year, if we're not one of those two that wins, that's why they say the process is so important, because we learn more about those grants, something that can help the community. We want to just focus on that even if we didn't get it. It's still, those grants are still there. Anybody can apply for them. So There's a little bit of a misconception about that. It just kind of moves you to the front in terms of the grant application process. If you're Stellar.
But you can reapply for Stellar in another year if you don't get it money, is that correct?
Yes, it's my understanding that Marion has actually applied 5 times. So, you know, sometimes it is and sometimes it's a learning process. First time you apply, they come back and they give you some educational points. Thank you. So, any other questions? If not, we can wrap this up. Again, I have a handout here that has the initiatives on it, has the members of the task force, and then I also have one that has all of those survey results that I mentioned. So feel free to take one of these as you leave, and if you have any other questions, also walk around, make some comments. We'll be doing this again this evening at 7 o'clock, so if you know of somebody who would like to attend, please encourage them to come back and hear some of this information. We'd be happy to have them. So thank you very much, and thanks to WTRE for the Periscope.